Hey, believe it or not, Jason Kilar likes movie theaters, and that's really important because theaters need to start playing a major role. Think about Avatar coming out in the next few weeks. How is that even going to work unless we get to experience it in a theater? That and DC, when they're talking about this new game they're playing at Warner Brothers with the DC comic space, theaters have to play a major role. So we want theaters to come back. We talk about this and all the leadership decisions that need to be made to set Hollywood right on this episode of Hollywood Breaks. Enjoy. Wish I had a beer on me. This is my chance to actually drink a beer.
I'm disappointed in you don't have a beer. I mean, if I had a beer, it'd be a little weird because it's 9 a.m.
This is the moment. This is it. I'm so far ahead of you. I can actually be drinking Vision Craft Brew right here, right now.
Literally, not just in your, the brew of your mind, but actual
and Keith,
beverage.
I went down to the bar and I asked, "Do you have Vision Craft Brew?" And they didn't have it.
We haven't gotten to Europe yet, Tim. We're working on it.
I see how it is. Well,
I gotta hire an international distributor before we can go that far.
I recommend giving that a shot because Paris would be a good place to be drinking some Vision Craft Brew.
Plus, it would give me an excuse to go to Paris, right? I could go see how they're setting up the brew and see if it works. Yeah.
Listen, if you want an excuse, the place I'm staying. It's like 2 doors down and across the street from a restaurant called. I'm gonna totally ruin this name, so someone has to correct me on how to pronounce it in French properly. But Le Deux Magouts, it's like the two maggots, I think is how you translate it here.
Really?
Yeah, but my favorite story about this place is J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan sat here and wrote episode 7 of Star Wars right here at this restaurant here.
No
on
way.
The corner. Kid you not, it's the story of the place, and they loved it because everyone around them spoke French and they were processing Star Wars. He said the public could have literally sat there and listened to the new Star Wars movie being played out as they went through it.
Wow. Right? Why Paris? Is that where Lawrence Kasdan lives now?
Keith, why not Paris? I think that's what you have
Why not? Indeed.
Yeah. I think they were looking for Vision Craft
somewhere.
Brew.
Why not?
They were driving around trying to find where they had it, and they ended up right here.
Well, don't say they were drinking it because I don't want any credit for The Force Awakens. All right.
Yeah.
Don't give Vision Craft Brew any credit for The Force Awakens.
I read that in like some airline magazine.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Virgin Atlantic.
So is that why you specifically sought out that location, because you wanted to be right there? Because I know you are a fan of The Force Awakens, so I don't.
That is so close to my heart that you would think that's why we came to this area, but no, that's not why we came here. This is the best part. If you ask me, the best part of Paris is this. It's called Saint-Germain. It's the area of shopping and restaurants, and across the river from us is the Louvre, and Notre Dame is not too far away. So. It's a great location. How's
Notre Dame looking? They started rebuilding it, haven't they?
Yeah, there's definitely construction.
Yeah.
All around it. Still a great sight to see. This is an awesome city, and wintertime and Christmas time, it's awesome because all the Christmas villages that are around. We just came from Vienna and Amsterdam too. So the Christmas villages are just popping up all over Europe. It's awesome. You just walk around and drink.
That is a good idea. Going to Europe for Christmas. Good for you, Tim.
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. Thanks.
Now I know who to turn to when my wife and I decide to plan our trip to Europe and Christmas. I'll tell Sarah, hey, let me just call Tim. He'll plan the whole thing for us. He's been there over the holidays. He knows.
But listen, I've had time to read, and I've read Founders Brew. Pretty awesome. Andrew Rosen's newsletter was great this week. He talked about the what was it called? The effect,
the Linkletter effect.
The Linkletter effect.
Yeah.
Really great. I've been catching up on films, and I'm out there. You really were hammering Kilar this week on in your newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I think that's a little strong term, Tim. I wouldn't say I was hammering him, but he wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, for those of you who have not read the Founders Brew yet. And it was more or less a description of sort of where we were from pretty much 2010 onward in terms of the industry. And then, the subsequent DVD dropouts, and then the pivot to streaming, and then the pandemic, and sort of now we're sort of in this weird place of like, are we going to do streaming, or what's happening? And I thought it was interesting, mainly because, as I noted in the newsletter, he definitely wrote with a very much a love of the industry and what movies and entertainment are capable of doing. And yet, and as I commented, it didn't seem like that really came out much during his tenure at Warner Media. It seemed like it was almost when he was at Warner Media, it was almost like, we have to fail and fail fast, and I have to get HBO Max up and running. So whatever it takes to do that, consequences be damned. And then the article sort of, it's almost like in sort of looking back, he's sort of was like, yeah, it was kind of cool to work in that industry and be involved in these crafting of these really cool stories. And he was optimistic. He's like, this is just one bumpy road and the industry will evolve. I mean, he kind of leaned a little bit more into sort of the idea of more consumer centric experiences, i.e. sort of alluding to the metaverse, which I'm not convinced is 100% the future, but I mean,
and the theaters, right? He talked about even the theater throwback.
Yeah,
it's interesting that his approach to it, because you can imagine the early thought process of Hulu, let's say, of what it means to put things on streaming. And you can imagine how that sounds so disruptive to a theater going audience that they probably acted very slow. They really were pivoting in the cord cutting scene, getting around television more than they cared about the theatrical releases really. Yeah. And who, opposed to Netflix, they were saying like, no, we're going to be in films and sometimes make TV shows. Right. I feel like Hulu's like, we're going to try and make TV shows. And then sometimes, just like TV has film on it, we'll go that way. In reality, the user experience is nearly the same. I'm using my television set to watch it, call it a film, call it a TV show. I don't care. It's going to look like this and going to work like this. Right.
Yeah.
So the precursor for that. And then when the pandemic hits, it was such an odd play that he had the opportunity to kind of set the game and understand how it happened. He wasn't afraid of HBO Max, but as you pointed out in your article, he was just slow to understand how the community would respond to that kind of a pivot.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that sort of when he was hired, everyone's like, wait, who's this guy? Like nobody really remembered that he was actually the first CEO of Hulu. And I think, when anybody comes from the outside in the industry, it's always sort of like you look at them with this okay, did they really understand how this industry works and how relationship based it is? And everyone wants to come in and said, I can fix it. I can fix it. And I think a lot of people looked at Jason Kilar as sort of this tech bro guy who came in, and the tech, mantra is fail fast, fail often. And so he's like, all right, we're just going to start breaking shit left, right, and center. Now, obviously, looking back, Project Popcorn, which was the pushing of all Warner Brothers releases onto the HBO Max platform, sort of during the almost the height of the pandemic, when we were dealing with all the variants and no one knew what was happening. Obviously, was a success for HBO Max. It really put it on the map. It put a lot of eyeballs when people really weren't comfortable going to the theaters. But he completely forgot the relationship angle and just ignored the creative community and just didn't have the necessary conversations with all the talent who, put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, not to mention in front of the camera, behind the camera, to make sure this movie looks as good as possible for a theatrical experience. And then you're just dumping it into HBO Max just to save your streamer. And I think there could have been some finesse there that I think, and I would imagine would rightfully acknowledge that there were some mistakes made there.
Maybe that's why he's pulling back with the theatrical.
Yeah, that's why he's kind of had an entire paragraph about the theatrical experience and how Alamo Drafthouse and those kinds of experiences may be the future. And I'm like, well, you could have leaned in and helped them out a little bit. Like you could have negotiated with Alamo Drafthouse, or and then he brings up the Dragon doing an exclusive premiere of the House of Dragon at a movie theater, which, as I pointed out in the newsletter, Robin Geisett has mentioned before here, which is a great idea. well, why didn't he lean in and help do that when he had the power? I mean, it's just interesting, these sort of
it's because Robin said it afterward, and he's been listening to us.
Yeah, right.
So now
and he's listening to us now.
Right.
He's getting it. Now he's understanding, which is why he, talked about, the theatrical experience needs to evolve, which
he's
yes,
clearly a fan of Hollywood Breaks. Clearly,
yeah, obviously he's obviously a regular listener. So, it's interesting that there's this afterthought, like, oh yeah, this you can do this, you can do this. Well, it's like, well, why didn't you do some of those things when you were in charge? Like, you could have figured out a way to maybe take some of those releases, like a Dune, which really probably could have done really well in a theatrical aspect, and tried to work out something with an Alamo Draft Hour, where, like, do it on HBO Max, but then help out sort of the fledgling, theaters. I don't know what that looks like, but it would have been worth experimenting, at least. If you're gonna throw an entire slate on
obviously
HBO Max.
Paramount won that game. They just were willing to do what they needed to, and maybe just the push from The Quiet Place made Paramount dive into it sooner than later. They didn't have a choice. Right. But they also didn't fight the creative side. I feel like Warner Brothers was in the middle and Disney was on the other side. Really, because just keep in mind Disney and Scarlett Johansson's clash, where they basically said, sure, we're going to release it, and then didn't give her full credit for what the film would have done in the theaters. So the time of pandemic. But Kilar is an interesting character because of the time that he spent at Warner Brothers and the moment that he had. We know Bob 2 was released recently from Disney. Like the transition time has been a very short time for some of these CEOs. Yeah. And trying to figure out really what the future is going to be. We know, like, with the last 2 years or 3 years is not the future. It might have just been a recovery stage, but not necessarily a pivot. And no one really gained much through this process, except for, again, maybe Paramount, who's sitting on a couple $1 billion because of their proper investments. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say, with Bob the second, as we talked about a little bit last week with Tim Heindel, it would have been interesting to see that experiment play out a little longer, just so we could see some more data, maybe get a little more insight into what data Disney, the soon to be probably ended Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution Unit, was using to determine where things were going. Like, what were the metrics? How are you making those decisions? Because it was like a mystery, so nobody really understood it. But there were aspects of it that made sense, and now it's sort of like, now it's probably going to go away and we're going back to the way things were, but is that really the future per se? So there are certain things that have been done in the pandemic by people like Kilar and Bob II that you wish could have played out a little bit more, and you wonder if they would have been a success or not. Just because it was sort of like as you said, with the quick transition, it just felt like, okay, we're going to completely abandon what the guy before me was doing, and now we're going to try something. We're going to go back to the way what we were doing before. Now, that's not to say that Iger and his new team of let's figure out how this is going to work is going to come back with the exact same thing pre-pandemic, or whether or not it's going to be some amalgamation of what Chapek was doing and way things were when Iger was there. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out as well. Totally. Even Warner Brothers isn't doing so well after Kilar either. This goofy thing that's happening with DC Comics is like, what? Have they lost control of one of their greatest brands they had control over? Should they just give it up and hand it over to maybe they should give it to Sony, give Sony a chance to mess up with some comics. Well, yeah, I worry when you put Tom Rothman and comic books together, it makes me a little nervous. But it's so for those of you who don't know, this week has been a very interesting week in the DC world. I think it was Wednesday, an article came out in the Hollywood Reporter basically saying that the new plan that James Gunn and Peter Safran are putting together, now heads of DC, is basically going to scrap pretty much everything from the Snyderverse, including talent. So, and just going to maybe just start over from the beginning with a whole new plan and how we're going to attack these characters. And it's interesting because when I was reading that article, it was pretty detailed, which
means they probably had a pretty high up source. It wasn't just like an assistant somewhere or, a mid-level mid manager. And it felt like it was maybe potentially serving two roles. One, essentially announcing to the talent, we're not afraid to get rid of you. So don't come to us with your ridiculous demands of $15 million payas and back ends. Like, we're not afraid to dump you.
Right.
And sort of tangentially to that, also, let's see how this plays out in the universe. Like, if we were to dump Henry Cavill as Superman, which, as most of you know, made a triumphant return about a month ago in Black Adam, and it was it felt a little presumptuous, sort of like, yes, we're making Man of Steel 2, and Dwayne Johnson running around saying, I brought Henry back as Superman because he's the people's Superman, and we're going to make so much money on this movie. And that's not making that much money. And, it just felt a little presumptuous to be so assured that everything was moving forward. And maybe that was what was discussed. But once the new heads came on, it's like, okay, now all bets are off. So it might be a way to sort of see how this all plays out. And then, of course, James Gunn came out the next day on Twitter saying, okay, so about that article, some of it's true, some of it's not, some of it's blatantly false. But he didn't clarify which is which. But I could see a sort of game going on here because, obviously Mike DeLuca and Pam Dabdi, who are the heads of Warner Brothers, James Gunn and Peter Safran, have been around a long time. They know how to play the game. And I think this is a little bit of a chess match. They're saying, okay, here's what they're floating ideas for
But is this just
for two reasons.
A call to action because Black Adam was so underperforming.
Yes.
Like they had to basically put Dwayne Johnson in his place for a moment. So they're basically showing their ability and showing their muscles, not just flesh muscles, but an actual chutzpah behind the scene.
Yeah.
And saying, look at Dwayne, we appreciate the effort you put into it. It didn't work out. We didn't make tons of money that we're going to keep on going with the universe that you believe you've created and brought back.
Right. Yeah.
But this is a poor way of doing it. Like to put that out there in the world to see where the fans are going to respond to it. I feel like they're just disrupting something that they barely held on to.
Yeah. I mean, this is a difficult thing because we went through this a lot when I was at Fox. The leadership at the time responded a lot to what was happening online, which is a very small, specific subset of an audience. Yes, they're loyalists, but the ultimate reality is they're going to the movie regardless. They can bitch and moan about the trailer and this shot and this guy's costume or this character's costume, but they're going to go, if only so they can hate on it and say, I was right. The problem is, for these movies, there needs to be a growth potential. And I think we're hitting the point where it's almost flatlining and it's starting to tilt in the wrong direction, right? So I think we have to start thinking about ways to grow the audience. Now, I often go back to Days of Future Past, which in my mind was one of the best X-Men movies. And one of my colleagues I was working with at the time was not a comic book fan. And I sent her the third trailer, just being like, hey, what do you think of this? Because I'm a comic book. I know about comic books. I grew up reading them. So I kind of know the ins and outs. And what she said to me, she's like, this is the first trailer I've seen of a comic book movie that makes me feel like I am not a comic book fan, would still enjoy it and understand the story. Nice. I felt like I could show up and still enjoy it as a movie, not as part of a comic book.
Right. And so it's like an everyman story opposed to some kind of inside
baseball. Like that's exactly the word she used. This movie didn't feel like it was inside baseball. And I think that is what DC in particular needs to start doing. Stop with sort of like these movies that are so inside baseball. It's okay to listen to the fans. There's nothing wrong with that. You do want their support because they can be very vocal. But at the end of the day, you're making a movie that has to appeal to a broad audience and has an opportunity to grow its audience. And I think what we're starting to see with a lot of these comic book movies is that the audience is starting to peak and is now diminishing because it feels the same movie over and over and over again. So now maybe we have to start thinking broader and not be so concerned with the fans and, what they're thinking, what their problems are. There are a lot of problems with the Snyder movies. There's no doubt about that. There were a lot of problems with them, and it wasn't all the fans. They just weren't that appealing to people who weren't diehards, in it 24/7 and sitting in their basement reading comic books all the time. Like that's just not.
Are we done with that? I mean, isn't Snyder told his story? Look, they're in the can, they already exist, they're not going to go anywhere. If you like them, you can still watch them.
Yeah,
but aren't we finished with that version of it?
Oh yeah,
I find a different version. And we have to find characters that do relate to us. I like the idea of, if we're going to play in the comic book space, that it's a relatable situation,
right?
That there is, it's evolved with, I don't know, the contemporary times. To me, I think Wonder Woman 1984 was an absolute disaster. I don't know. I don't get that at all. I don't
know how that movie was even made.
You steal the title of one of the greatest novels of all time, and then you don't have any reference to it or any preference for it at all. It doesn't just didn't make any sense. It felt like it was made by committee.
Right.
So maybe James Gunn is basically going to flex his muscles here for a moment. He's going to have the James Gunn version of it and kind of just get rid of all the baggage and start over and do it his way.
Yeah. Supposedly he's, he and Peter Safran are, locked up somewhere. They got specific even to say where they were locked up.
They might right here, and they might be in Paris.
They might be in right Paris
here at this restaurant, right?
But I believe they're in Aspen. They were in Aspen. I don't know if they're still there, but that's apparently where they had disappeared to focus. And I guess James was talking to a lot of writers and sort of spitballing ideas, which is it's great. I mean, there's a rich tapestry of characters they can use to build a whole new plan. I mean, apparently this is going to be like a 10-year plan that they're going to present to Zaslav, I think, next week, and sort of lay out their vision for the next 10 years. And I don't think there's anything wrong with starting over again. Like, there are a lot of assets to the actors that Snyder brought in, but at the end of the day, if you want to restart, maybe it's time to start with new talent. And a lot of the talent that's there now, they're not spring chickens. And if you want to invest in 10 years, like Henry Cavill's almost 40, you want a 50-year-old Superman at the end of this? I don't think so. So, I think the reality is that they may have to start looking to the future. Now, it's impossible that there could be sort of like reboots in the way of that Batman has done it, where you have a couple actors do 3 movies and then you reboot it and bring in a younger actor, which is entirely possible. But I think the reporter was probably also a way of saying, okay, we'll do maybe 1 or 2 more movies with you, but then you're being put out to pasture. We're bringing in all new talent. And it's going to be interesting to see if they tie in sort of the CW shows, which, given Nexstar taking over CW, probably means that those shows aren't going to be as relevant as they once were because of Nexstar pulling away from expensive originals. So how's that all going to tie in? So there's a lot of questions they have to answer, but I think this was the first sort of test buoy, if you will, to say, okay, let's see how this plays out. And from what I can see, there wasn't anyone like, oh, this is awful, this is terrible, Gal Gadot's my only Wonder Woman, Henry Cavill's my only.
She was a pretty great Wonder Woman. I hated
she
the
was
movie,
great.
but
I was actually sad to hear that because I really liked her as Wonder Woman, but at the end of the day, Wonder Woman.
I feel like we need one more movie from her. Like, I feel like the first one was absolutely set the stage for a really amazing character. Robin Wright's character, all the whole backstory that's there. The love relationship's a little goofy, but then 1984 was such a disaster. I feel like we need, what I mean? Like, the third part of the trilogy is often really good. Like, the second time is the second act isn't the best act, so we can forgive it.
Except in the case of Dark Knight.
Well, that's probably,
where the second one was like the best of the 3.
Toy Story 2 was pretty good too. I wouldn't call them on Toy Story.
Empire Strikes Back, arguably the best of the first 3.
That's what I was kind of thinking.
4, 5, 6, this is the first trio. So
we'll see.
Well, I think maybe they definitely didn't do that in 1984, but
maybe the test plan for like the fan based, let's bring back something, amazing spectacle is what we're going to see soon with Avatar. Maybe this will give us a sense of like how the fans would respond to an old storyline, bringing it back, playing itself out. And it's coming out soon. I think the press has already kind of done some screenings of it, and there's some news out there that it's visibly pretty great.
They had the premiere, I believe it was last Tuesday, I think, in London. And again, you have to take caveat. Press reactions are often, to Black Adam, because we were just talking about it. The press reactions to that were overwhelmingly positive, and then the reviews were not so much. So you got to take it for the grain of salt. But the most part, the reactions have been what we expect. An amazing visual spectacle, like jaw-dropping visuals. It looks amazing. You feel like you're there. And then Kyle Smith, who's the film reviewer for the Wall Street Journal, I think he summed it up just right. It's a spectacle. It's great. Its visuals are amazing. I found myself not really caring about the characters, and it kind of just ends. Then there's no like resolution, which again makes sense somewhat because they've got 3 more movies coming.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
but
episode 1, right?
Yeah, but that's what to expect. The important thing is whether or not it's enough to get people to show up. Now, tracking right now, I think, is 175, 180 for the weekend. So that's pretty good, to say the least. Yeah. But as Cameron has mentioned, it needs to make a buttload of money. So in order to justify the expense and how much money they've spent on it. So plus the fact that there's 3 more coming. So it seems to me that it could start out really well, but we'll see if it holds. And you're right.
This is the first one under Iger's new reign. Like, I think there might be some critical nature to making a smart decision after the box office plays itself out and saying, hey, as a new CEO, do I keep it going because we've made promises and have a big picture? Or do we say, it's not exactly the box office hit we want to, we got to get down to business, cut expenses where we need to, and get rid of it? It's a critical time for this kind of a story to play itself out. Yeah. It's interesting that the characters aren't, I think the flaw of the first one is, again, I couldn't name one character. I know there's not one quotable line that I remember. Yeah. I kind of barely remember the storyline. I just remember it being a theatrical experience that was, worth going to, like a 4D movie that was worth going to.
Well, it's interesting because that's something that Tim and I addressed last week when we were sort of talking about the overarching campaign, and something that Tim and I both agreed on because we worked on the first one and we went through the pains of research and figuring out how to tell this story. And what the research told, Tim, and eventually was relayed to us, is that we need to tell the story through Jake's perspective. Start with Jake, give them someone to identify, to feel like the magic, how, going to Pandora, the first words, I think in the trailer, are Jake. Like, that's the first word. That's the name of the character. And in this point, we don't get any of that. We see none of that. We go right to Pandora. There's no sort of like, we're back on Earth. There aren't any real humans even shown. Actually, it's all Na'vi. So it's interesting that they chose to do it that way versus like, okay, let's remind people about Jake. And Sigourney Weaver character, who I guess is a different Na'vi this time around, and whether or not any of I think Giovanni Ribisi is coming back. I know Kate Winslet's in it, but I don't know if she's a human or if she's a Na'vi. So it's like there's all these questions, which I'm not saying you have to answer every question. I'm just saying I think there were lessons we learned in the first one that seem to be somewhat put aside for this campaign. So I'll be interested to see like if the experience of it is enough to get people to continually come back, because that's what made the first one a hit. It wasn't the story, it wasn't the acting, it was the experience. It was this overwhelming, I feel like I'm in the movie, versus things coming at me that really hadn't been done in a long time, and that's why people were talking about it. And maybe that will happen again. Maybe there are spectacles in this one that raises it to the next level. He shot it in water. It wasn't like, take Aquaman, for example, where the water effect was more CGI versus actually shooting people in water. So, there's that aspect which may make it even more spectacular. But again, we don't know. We don't really know that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to go because as it's supposed to. The marketing's made me curious, and I went to the first one, gotta go to the second one just to see. I feel like it's a throwback. I'll probably grab my kids and make them sit through it, and I hope it's not they don't have the experience like they did with Top Gun of like, I understood the storyline, but I don't get what all these references are. And I'm like, oh yeah, shoot, I forgot to prep you that there was a previous movie that I would never let you watch because it's from the 80s.
Yeah.
But there was some back here. But I, what's interesting, I was chatting with a friend of mine, Ryan Summers, and he and I were talking about just how Disney has lost some of its magic. With Lasseter gone, they lost James Gunn. They really don't have a creative force behind them like they've used to.
Yes,
and then they took on this library, something like Avatar. They have James Cameron in there, and we'll see how well they can support him and follow through with a vision from him. But you're just wondering if like Disney is stepping up on the creative game. Are they going to understand really what it's like to have the responsibility of these characters and not just exploit them and all of their universes and all of their material on every platform that they own forever, kind of a thing,
Yeah.
But actually kind of go back to telling stories and do what Disney does best. So to me, this is what Iger has to start weighing in on in the future is we are Disney. We are storytellers. We get the big picture stuff. If Avatar is not sticky, then Disney really is broken, because that's what Disney's always done, is made sticky characters and sticky plots.
I think this is, I mean, because let's take a step back here and look at the last few releases. So if you take Disney as a whole, so you had Buzz Lightyear, which did not do well.
Yeah.
Then you had Wakanda Forever, which is doing well, but is tracking behind the original, with the caveat that it's 30 minutes longer, which is obviously going to affect the box office in some way. And then you have Strange World, which was an absolute bomb, and it's going to cost the company upwards of, if you read some reports, $150 million when they've just lost 1.4 billion on content in the last quarter. So you're right. There is a lot of problems at Disney right now. And I think that's why Iger, when he came back, he's like, we're going to start focusing on the creative again. And listen, Disney's been through these booms and busts. There was that time in the late 80s, early 90s when the animation movies were terrible. And then, you had the Katzenberg era when he brought back sort of the magic, the Lion King, Aladdin. They had that wonderful run of Lion King, Aladdin, Little Mermaid. And it was just like, wow, they're back. And then Mermaid, Pixar started showing up. And it's like, wow, Disney really knows how to do it. Now, remember, the heart of Disney is animation. So if they are not nailing the animation, then yes, there's
and there was a moment where you thought Pixar would never lose an Oscar, and now Pixar can't make a film to survive. If they were a standalone corporation, they'd be in the red right now, trying to figure out what to do next.
Right.
Their latest releases just are not holding on to the true values of the storytelling that they once had. So I don't know. I'd be interesting in seeing how Avatar plays itself out, because Disney, such a big picture, it's such a big investment, and some big promises that Disney's going to have to make some major decisions here. So the next few weeks, I'll be very curious on what the corporate says as the film plays itself out, and what excuses they have, and who they're going to throw under the bus. And
I think what'll be interesting to see is sort of the first week, sort of the press. I mean, obviously the trade press will hail it as a hit regardless, because that's just what they do. But it'll be interesting to see what happens to the stock price. If stock price starts to dip, then that means that a lot of people are like, oh boy, Disney's going to lose a buttload of more money on this movie, and they've got 3 more coming. And it'll be interesting to see like what Cameron's saying, because Cameron's not one known to follow a script when it comes to PR and press. So it'll be interesting to see like what he stirs up. Exactly. And so,
because he has to defend his career on this one, he's not just playing games at the box office.
I've said it a million times, and I'll say it again. I will never bet against James Cameron. He is a visual storyteller. He knows how to fashion visual elements that just grab an audience and don't let go. Now we're in a different world now, where we've got, since 2009, where we've been bombarded with decades of Marvel movies and spectacle and 3D. All the Marvel movies, let's not forget, are all 3D movies. So 3D kind of became sort of corny again. And that's what really lifted Avatar, was the sort of the immersive 3D element of it. So is that going to be enough this time around? I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, we have 3 episodes left before this year is up. So coming up in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing some 2022 wrap-ups, some summaries. I want to hear some predictions for 2023. So you better start thinking about that, making a short list of what do you think 23 is going to look like and what we're going to see coming up in Hollywood, because I want some inside scoop there. Better call your friends on this one.
Happy to do that. I will.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have to do a little bit of a celebration and cover your favorite Christmas stories. So that's 2 weeks from this week. We'll be doing the Christmas episode. It's 2 days before Christmas. We'll be doing it on the 23rd of December. How great is that going to be? We'll be wearing our Christmas sweaters.
I'm going to wear Santa
drinking
hat.
our Vision Craft brew straight from the mug with some
we're coming out with a special Christmas Christmas brew. So
wonderful. I'll be drinking that. Can't wait for my 6-pack to show up for that one. My friend, good to see you. And thanks to Tim Heidel last week for filling in for me. We have the 2 Tims bookending you here. You have some good stuff going on.
Yep.
Well, maybe we can rotate us around every once in a while. We'll get you.
Yeah, maybe we'll be like the Tonight Show. We'll have like a bevy of guest hosts that we can fill in for you every now and then.
Yeah, we need like a 3rd Tim, so we got a rotating table of Tim. So when you mention a Tim in your newsletter, it's always going to be true.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I'll get on my Rolodex to find, so we have the 3 amigos of Tims.
And Lydia, thank you for always being there for us. We know it's late for you in London. At least I know it's late for you in London, because I'm also late here in Paris. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. This weekend, we're going to go to Keith. We're going to miss you. Lydia and I are going to dinner with our significant others on Saturday night. So we're going to
good for
talk about you plenty.
Thanks for including me. Appreciate it.
You'll be in our heart.
Okay, great.
I'll see you next week.
See you next week.